Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into the spine-chilling world of real-life mysteries and unexplained experiences. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and share your own tales in the comments. I moved to a different city for university at the peak of the pandemic. I lived off campus in a suite with a couple of my friends from my hometown. Life happened, and they both ended up moving out by the end of the first semester. So I was now living alone in a very quiet neighborhood. I got off of work late one night and crawled into bed around 12 a.m. I woke up about an hour later to the sound of footsteps shuffling around in my bedroom. I opened my eyes to see a very tall man in my doorway, backlit by the streetlights, with his cell phone upright in his hand as if he was recording. When the person registered, I was awake. They backed their way out of the room and started running. I followed them outside and watched them hop into the driver's seat of an empty car that had been left running before speeding down the street. I had no information to give to the police when they arrived. To this day I have no idea who that person could have been or what they were doing in my bedroom at 1 a.m. Okay, so, this one still gives me chills just thinking about it. I will say that, to a point, I believe in paranormal stuff. I have had too many creepy and unexplained things that I can confirm with others happen. However, I try to be very skeptical and always try to find the most reasonable explanations. This happened about 25 years ago. I was 7 or 8 years old. I was lying in the top bunk of the bunk bed I shared with my twin brother. We had an attached bathroom, and the only light coming into the room was the light emanating from under the bathroom door. I was lying in bed, listening to my brother cry as my dad tried to remove a splinter from my brother's finger. I looked at the foot of my bed, and I saw a man about 5 feet 10 inches tall, with long hair about shoulder length, a short beard, and what looked like a flannel shirt and possibly overalls or suspenders standing there, and his pupils were glowing, kind of green like if you see an animal's eyes in the dark. I started screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, there is a man in here, standing at the foot of my bed." I looked back, and he was gone, and I just kept screaming. I was terrified. This apartment had a front and back door, but they were absolutely locked as we lived in a bad neighborhood in a very old part of the city. 10 years later, I recounted the story to my dad, and he had honestly forgotten about it. He did say, and he did not tell me when I was younger, that he did from time to time swear he saw a man who matched that description, minus the glowing eyes, in the apartment late at night. My dad had searched the apartment a few times after seeing him, but there was no trace of a way he came in, and often, he would follow the man to a closet, and he just sort of disappeared. This is something that happened to me quite recently, and it creeped me out so much. I live alone in my apartment, and I'm a horror gaming fan, and thus I was scouring Steam looking for a cool horror game. I put on my headphones, and I watched multiple trailers and eventually came to a game called Horror in the Hood. Looked at the page and watched the trailer. Here is where the creepy part begins. Near the end of the trailer, there's a very creepy voice saying something like, "Can you help me, please?" 1 second, literally 1 second after I watched it, I could clearly hear, from outside my headphones, so it was muffled, an old male voice saying, "I can help, haha," from my hallway behind me. Especially the laugh was creepy. Needless to say, I threw off my headphones and immediately looked behind me, only to be greeted by the dark hallway. I stared into it, slowly grabbing my ruler that was on my desk. After moments that felt like an eternity, I was able to stand up. Slowly moved towards the hallway while grabbing a tiny flashlight I have on my nightstand. I flashed the hallway from a distance, but there was nothing. To give light to the hallway, I have to go into it and turn the switch there, which was very creepy to do. Of course, there was nothing there at all, but it creeps me out still. I left the light on everywhere that night and still keep on the light in the hallway when I am on my computer now. 2 days after this happened, I went back to watch the Horror in the Hood trailer to make sure that the "I can help, haha" was not in the trailer, and I just made a mistake. It's not in the trailer. It gives me the creeps just typing this. This wasn't scary, but it is unexplained. My first husband and I were separated at the time. I dreamed one night he arrived at our home and knocked on the door. When I opened the door, he looked extremely tired and a sunken version of himself. Even though he didn't say it, he was asking for forgiveness with his eyes. Of course I forgave him and welcomed him inside. Our favorite thing to do was to lay in bed and talk for hours, so we lay in the bed and began our conversation about nonsense stuff. As we were talking, the window at the foot of our bed was glowing with a bright, warm light, not blinding but comforting, and as we continued to talk, the light became brighter and brighter until it engulfed us both in its warmth. I woke up and couldn't get back to sleep. About an hour later, my husband's mother called me hysterical and told me that my husband had been murdered an hour before. I realized then that he had come to see me to ask for forgiveness before he passed over. He was a drug addict and hid it from me for years, which caused our separation. He was in a bad location, and a person there took his life. But I take comfort knowing I was with him when he passed. My friends and I went exploring in the caves in Lilydale as teenagers. They were and still are rumored to be haunted. But no one knew it at that time. We were about halfway in when this happened about 25 years ago. We were telling stories and laughing, and we could hear this faint clinking noise up ahead. My friends were curious, so we decided to go further. As we went deeper and deeper into the cave, we saw a light up ahead and could not make out where it was coming from. We started to see a figure, but it wasn't moving. We slowly approached the figure, and it appeared to be an old man mining, wearing dirty overalls and a dirty white shirt and a dirty yellowish hat. His sleeves were rolled up, and he had a long beard. One of my friends yelled out, "Boo!" And he turned towards us and started running after us. It appeared he was in about 50 to 60 years of age, but he didn't move like a man. It took us a good 10 minutes to get back to the car, and we sped our way home. About a mile past the caves, we saw the same man on the side of the road. We were all screaming, trying to figure out how he got ahead of us without a vehicle. We have only talked about that night a couple of times, but we are all convinced we saw a ghost or supernatural being. Back in 2015, I lived alone in a studio that was in a not so great neighborhood. It always had an eerie vibe to it, like something was moving in the corner of your eye or breathing down your neck when you got up to get a midnight snack. I was having a rough time with depression then, so I completely chalked those feelings up to my own mind being strange and playing tricks on me. A friend needed a place to stay temporarily, so I told her the couch was hers as long as she needed it. I had been away for a few nights, and when I returned, she said she wanted to talk about the apartment. She said something about it being just downright spooky. That it felt like something was always behind her, and that she would keep music playing or someone on the phone to not feel so uncomfortable. I get the most sickening goosebumps thinking back to this, and if she hadn't been there to witness it all, I simply wouldn't have even believed my own eyes. In the midst of our very conversation, as we were standing in the kitchen area, which was on one side of the apartment, the bedroom was on the opposite side less than 50 feet away, we saw the full-length mirror, which was leaning against the wall, do a sort of teetering walk and flop flat on top of the bed. We froze and looked at each other, then marched straight over to it. We picked up the mirror, and for about 5 minutes, we tried to recreate how the mirror could have done that. With the angle it was set at against the wall, it should have shattered on the floor as it was too far from the bed to land on it. How did it teeter like that? As we were trying to come up with a reasonable explanation, both of our eyes were drawn to a framed photo of my family on top of my dresser. The fucking photo teetered forward left, right, then slammed face down. Exactly the same way the mirror had, except it felt aggressive, it felt personal. I set it back in its rightful place, and we ran out of there as fast as humanly possible. We moved into her family's home within that week, and neither of us has ever experienced anything like that before or afterwards. In 2018 I decided to take my 2 kids and pregnant wife camping. By camping, I mean we rented a cabin in Luray, Virginia, on a big family campsite based on the Hanna-Barbera Yogi Bear cartoons. Yes, we camped at Jellystone Park and campgrounds. We had packed all the dishes and food items we needed, and the kids had a blast every day. Unfortunately, I had to wrap up some client work the first night we were there, reviewing contract details, nothing exciting. My wife was 3 months pregnant and exhausted. She and the dog went to bed in the master bedroom as I continued working from 11 p.m. till about 1 a.m. The kids were asleep in a bunk bed in the upstairs room. I fell asleep alone on the futon at around 1 a.m. Then I woke up at 1:45 a.m. when one corner of the futon was being shook up and down, like when an angry dad wants to wake up a sleeping teenager. I woke up and asked what was wrong. No one was there. The place was country dark, my wife's bedroom door was locked, and I didn't want to wake up a pregnant woman. The kids were still sound asleep, and they had a night light on. I went back to the futon and passed out at 2ish. Woke up at 3:35 a.m. to the exact same situation. This time the bed was still shaking when I woke up, so I knew I wasn't dreaming. There was no one there, again. I looked around and checked all doors again. Everything was still locked up. I looked under the futon for anything, an animal, mice, a pipe, a vent, or anything else that could have vibrated. I just figured the AC unit must have made the futon shake, and then I passed out. At 8 a.m., when I took the dog for a walk, I noticed all the pipes, electrical, and AC unit were on the opposite side of the cabin from the side I slept on. Also, there were no holes or places for an animal large enough to make my futon shake with me, a 225 pounds man, on said futon. I chalked it up to something strange and just let it go. A few years ago, when I was in my mid to late 20s, I was still living with my parents. I would stay up pretty late on the weekends because that was the only time I had to myself and did not have any responsibilities for the morning. Cozy living room off the kitchen. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. I know that's the witching hour or whatever, and it makes sense it's so quiet in the dead of night. It was pretty dark, but I could make out some things in the room. I either had the TV on or the main light on the lowest setting. Probably just the TV light or the fire still going a tiny bit. So fairly dark. I see a dark cloud move basically from like 6 feet from the foot of the couch where I was at towards the kitchen. Saw it for just 1 second, maybe 2. Followed by a fairly strong garlicky smell for like 5 seconds. Didn't really freak me out, though, it kind of was just, did I just see something? And what is the smell? For a breath or two. I used to work for a swimming pool company and was renovating an in-ground pool for a customer. Young family with kids in a fairly wealthy neighborhood. The pool had been empty and covered for some time. I took off the cover, and a middle-aged man was living in there in the shallow end. Extremely scary looking and disturbing looking, it smelled like straight up ass. He immediately ran away and was barking as he was running. I knocked on the door and let the man of the house know. He called the cops. The creepy thing was the man in the pool had several belongings, including the children's underwear stuffed in a pillowcase that he was using, and various things from the house. There were rotisserie chicken carcasses everywhere. They had noticed things missing, so he must have been going in and out of the house all the time. He had a treasure trove. Other weird thing was they had a lot of windows in the back of the house with no curtains, so he could probably see everything they had been doing. They thought the smell was stagnant water in the pool. I knew one of the cops that responded and kept in touch. They never identified the guy. Lots of creepy stories here. I have a very small memory of my childhood. I used to go to one of my aunts in the same building every day to play with her. One day when I went there, the apartment door was open, and I went inside thinking that family would be in the house. But there was no one. I went from room to room and in the end entered the bedroom. As I was convinced there was no one in the home at that moment, I was about to get out of the room. I heard a growling sound from beneath the big bed in the corner. The family didn't have any pet. The growling sound started getting more horrific as if someone was calling. I fainted, and then when my eyes were open, I was in the hands of my aunt, and a few people from nearby units were there. All of them were asking what happened to me, and I was continuously looking at the bed. I told my aunt what I experienced, and then she checked beneath the bed. There was nothing. But I clearly remember what I heard. Not me but my dad. He's not the type who believes in ghosts, also stone cold. I've never seen him flinch even once in the 33 years of being his son. About 10 years ago, he was on this business trip. We live in Thailand for context. He ended up staying in this old, sketchy looking hotel, but it was late, and he didn't have much choice. He got his room. It was the furthest room from the elevator on the 4th floor. He took a shower, drank 1 can of beer, and fell asleep. It was around 9 p.m. 12 a.m. on the dot. My mother received a phone call on her mobile phone. It was my dad. She picks up, but my dad didn't say anything. She got worried, so she hung up and called him back. He picked up. He said he was sound asleep and didn't call her. He even checked the phone history, and there was no record of this outgoing call. Weird. But they think nothing of it and both went back to sleep. 2 a.m., in my dad's hotel room. He woke up to a TV turning itself on. He just turned it off. A few minutes later, there's a sound coming from the bathroom, the sound of a water tap turning on. He checked it out, it was dry. This paranormal activity continues, and he was getting sick of it. He unplugged the TV and just ignored everything and went back to sleep till morning. I'd say that was the most classic move on the ghost's part. It's basically the most basic shit ghosts do in every story. But the funniest thing is, it doesn't click to my dad at all that it was paranormal. He told my mom the day after, like, that night was strange, coming from a full-on haunted hotel room survivor. I believe him. He gains nothing out of making that story up, and how he told it was completely unaware of how ghosty it sounds. We never get a conclusion of the story, but it makes me chuckle every time to think that that ghost must have been really frustrated. I'm doing everything right. Why are you not scared of me? Lol. This will sound ridiculous. But hand to God, this is a true story. I installed one of those foolish ghost detector apps. I had actually read some articles on how some people believe they can be of legitimate use and some activity has been caught using them. I figured what the hell, even just for fun, etc. I consider myself a healthy, skeptical believer, and I love paranormal stuff. I was sitting alone, out back of my 2-story duplex. Late afternoon, maybe 4 to 5 p.m. We have an old carport, and in an unused parking space we keep some chairs to sit out there in the evenings, have a smoke, etc. I'm playing with the app. Just the word function, where it will translate electromagnetic whatevers into words. You can ask questions and try to get responses, etc. The words are announced by a digital voice. Anyway, after about a half hour and maybe 12 words had been spoken by the voice function, a very, very human sounding voice came through the app. Through my phone, which I am holding in my hand. It was male, young, if I had to guess, maybe 16 to 22? It said, "Hello?" Just like that. "Hello?" As if someone was answering a phone. My first instinct is that I pocket dialed someone. But I was looking at the Ghost app screen the whole time. I checked the call log just to be sure. Nothing. I go back to the app and go to the dictionary, where it stores the last 20 words or so spoken. Clear as day, it logged the word hello as the last goddamn word caught. I was deeply unsettled, to put it mildly. I deleted the app immediately and went inside and wrapped myself in a huge warm blanket and put on a cozy show. I don't know how else to explain it, but it still creeps me out. This isn't my story, it's my grandmother's. When my gran was 10, her dad died in a train accident, leaving her and her mother to care for her much younger brother. A few years later her brother had come out of his bedroom in the middle of the night terrified. He said that there was a man at the end of his bed. My gran and her mum checked his room thoroughly and didn't find anything there. They all went back to bed. A few minutes later he complained again, saying that the man was still there. Once more they checked the room and found nothing. My gran's mum asked him what the man was doing. He said he was just smiling. She asked him to describe what the man looked like. Keep in mind that he was very little, around 2 or 3, I think, when his dad died, and he would have forgotten what he looked like by this point. As he was describing the man, my gran and her mum were beginning to get scared. He was describing his dad. I didn't believe in anything supernatural before I heard her story, now I'm not so sure. When my uncle died suddenly, the family was in so much grief because they weren't able to say their goodbyes and such. A family friend brought her niece, around 17 or 18 years/0, to the funeral, who she claims to be gifted. Just to give a disclaimer, this woman was in no way related to the family and has never seen my uncle before. I was skeptical at first until she asked the family if my uncle was wearing a plain shirt and shorts when he died. He was, and she told all of us who were there that my uncle was there with us. She said she was looking at the person inside the coffin when she felt someone beside her, looking at the man inside. She tried to play it cool until he said, "You can see me, can't you?" She told us that he initially didn't know he was dead and was lurking around in their house until one of my cousins shouted to nobody in particular as she was locking up the house, "Pa, we're just going to the funeral home," and that's how he knew he should follow. She also told each of his children very specific details, like, "That business venture you were hesitant with that you talked to your father about, he says you should pursue it." Or, "That bracelet you've always been asking him about, he says it's yours and it's in the second drawer of his nightstand." In the end we were all left amazed by this, but it was such a relief for the family members because they somehow felt like they were able to say goodbye peacefully. Towards the end of that day, the woman said, "He said you should put his glasses inside the coffin because he wants to wear them." They brought out his glasses, which were kept in a bag, and put it inside the coffin. The woman told us that when she saw him again, he had his glasses on, and a bit later, that he was saying goodbye because he could see the light. It was a sobering moment, and even though we could not believe what had just happened, we were at least happy the family got some closure. A few months ago, I stayed in a cabin with some friends we rented from Airbnb, and on the second night, I woke up to a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was rhythmic, like someone gently knocking on the wall. Curiosity got the better of me, so I got up and crept toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from a closet. I hesitated because we aren't allowed to mess with the closets or dressers at this location, but eventually opened the door. Inside, I found nothing but old coats hanging like definitely out of style coats I'd only ever seen in the 70s 80s movies. I closed the closet, and the tapping stopped at this point. Feeling uneasy, I returned to my bed. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it again, but this time it was coming from the other side of the room. I sat up. When I tell you my heart was racing, I could hear the heartbeat in my ears. Anyway, I decided to point my cell flashlight in that direction. The light flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a shadow move across the wall. It seemed like something not human. I bolted to my friend's room, shaking them awake, but when we returned, the closet was open and so was my room door, which I slammed shut when running out of the room. We packed up and left a couple of hours later, but honestly I can still hear that tapping sometimes, echoing in the quiet of my mind, a reminder that some doors should never be opened. My husband and I had just moved into a shitty rental in an even worse neighborhood. I think this was our second full day. I was lying down with our toddler to take a nap. We have 2 big dogs, and he always naps with a loud fan to block out sounds of them stomping around or barking. Our bedroom was just steps away from the front door, but I didn't hear it open. I heard footsteps across the squeaky hardwood floored living room and a ring of keys being dropped on the counter. And then nothing. Our bedroom doors were closed with both dogs in there with us, so they didn't bark. I assumed my husband had come home from his friend's house to get ready for work. About a half hour after hearing the keys drop, I texted him to see if he was still home. He replied that no, he wasn't, and hadn't been home. I freaked out. Called him. Grabbed the baby and put him on my back in a carrier, grabbed my gun, and went to clear the house. The front door was closed and unlocked, the door from the kitchen into the basement was open, and the door from the basement to the backyard was open. The gate in the backyard leading to the sidewalk was also open. Nothing was taken or disturbed. Except my sense of safety. I called the police, and they came to take a report, but nothing ever came of it, and we changed the locks that night. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, I was spending the summer at my grandparents' home in rural Guatemala. I guess my grandfather was going through something and was dealing with it the only way he knew, getting drunk. It was my first time seeing him like that, so I followed my mom's lead in dealing with him. She gave me a stash of mostly empty bottles and told me to pour them out in the little grove between my grandparents' home and my uncle's home. I go as far in as possible and start pouring them out when I suddenly hear some shuffling. I looked up, and to my right, there was a beaten and bloodied man, dressed in rags, sitting against a tree. There was a swarm of flies on him, and he smelled like dead fish, but all he said in a quiet voice was help. Of course, I stumbled back and was scared. I dropped the bottles because at that point, it didn't matter anymore. I ran to the house and told my mom. She didn't believe me at first, but I guess I looked scared enough that she sent her brother and a few other men to go check. My uncle came back and said they didn't find anyone, and I went with him a second time to the same spot, but it was empty. The ground that man sat on was the only patch of dirt that looked fresh, but the only thing that was proof it was the same spot was the stash of bottles I had dropped there. No explanation to this day. The house I live in is pretty old, one of the old mill owners' houses in the UK, and we have heard a lot of strange things here. Bangs, crashes, and things moving/falling are fairly normal, but one night I awoke to find myself in the middle of a bad case of sleep paralysis. I was laid flat on my back, and there was a huge shadow person leaning over me and pushing down on my chest. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out, and I couldn't move anything except my eyes to wake my husband. It was terrifying, but once I broke the spell and woke up, I realized it was simply a nightmare and felt better. In the morning when my husband woke up, he said to me while wide-eyed, "I know how this is gonna sound, but last night I woke up to a huge shadow person looming over your side of the bed. I could see its hands gripping the bottom of the frame on your side." It took me a couple of seconds to realize what I was looking at, and when I shot up in bed, it just disappeared. I had not at that moment told him about my experience. We still talk about that 10 years later from time to time, it was so profoundly strange. One morning, during the early lockdowns, restrictions eased enough for me to drive out to my hometown. I got up to leave at 4 a.m., it's not far, but I wanted to be there by 8 to go to my favorite cafe for breakfast, and stepped out onto my porch. I pulled the door shut and immediately didn't feel right. The air was completely still and stagnant, and silence had fallen over the valley, even my tinnitus was silent. I fumbled with my phone and turned the light on, shining the light around. Beyond my phone light was the thickest, inkiest black I have ever seen. I headed for my car, my steps seemed to echo as I walked across my brick porch. Glancing up at the trees and night sky, I saw nothing but only what was within like 2 meters of me. I didn't feel like I was walking across my porch and garden path, I felt like I was walking out across a span in a chasm. There should be trees rustling, crickets chirping, hell, the moon was shining last night, how the hell is it gone now? I hurried to my car, threw the bag in, and myself after it. The second I slammed the door shut, everything around me was bathed in silver moonlight, and in addition to my own panting, I could hear the waves of the breeze rustling the trees above and the gentle singing of crickets up the valley. I sat for a moment, wondering what had just happened. I turned the car on and departed. I lived at that house for 4 years and never experienced anything like that again. When describing it to other residents of that valley, they said that they had either experienced something eerie like that or knew someone who had. There's something up here, alright, was a common response to my tale. When I was a kid, I had a distant cousin who was just as obsessed with the paranormal as I was and who went amateur ghost hunting with her friends. Whenever our families visited, she'd tell me stories about where they'd been and what they'd seen. One place they'd been was an abandoned playground a town over, right up on the edge of some woods. Once upon a time, supposedly, a little girl had gone missing there, and the officers searching the woods for her had reportedly encountered a terrifying black dog. Only a few returned alive, and the girl was never seen again. My cousin said there wasn't much interesting there, but she did have a picture to show me that she'd taken. A bush with a shadow around it that, as far as adolescent me was concerned, sure as shit looked like a giant black dog lying down and staring at them. For years I had nightmares about that dog and would stay awake terrified if I forgot to close my closet door at night because I was convinced it was there in the shadows somewhere. It affected me so vividly that when I started writing my book a few years ago, I even included the dog as a spectral omen of death for one of the main characters. Like I could exorcise it if I gave it to someone else, maybe? Cut to last month, my grandmother, from the same side of the family as that cousin, who had come to our state to recover from a bad illness, falls, fractures her pelvis, and goes to the hospital. My family and I visit her frequently. One day I miss a visit, but my parents and brother still go. The next day, my dad, for the record, a strenuous skeptic, tells me casually that my grandma had woken up that evening and started asking if they'd seen that big black dog that was just here before and where it went off to. He was very confused by how fast the blood drained from my face. NGL, I've been really unsettled since. I think I was in college, about 20 years ago, and I was staying at my parents' for the weekend. They live in an apartment building. It was in the middle of the night, around 1 to 2 a.m., when suddenly we heard loud scratches and bangs on the entrance door. They were so loud that we all got up and gathered in the hallway to see what's happening. My father looked through the door sight, and there was nothing there. He then started to beat loudly on the door to make it stop. After a few seconds more, everything went silent. No footsteps, no sound, and when looking through the door sight, there was nothing there. Of course we didn't open the door because we all were very shocked by everything that happened. In the morning, when we got up, we almost believed it was all a dream until we opened the door and saw some deep, big scratches on the outside part of the door. The door was made of wood. To this day I still don't know what that was. There are no dogs in the building, and even if there were, it should have been a very large dog to leave those marks on the door. Also, such a big dog would bark, or at least you would hear its paws when walking outside your door. I lived in a farmhouse for a couple of summers and slept in the old bedroom of the farmer's late brother, passed away in the 90s. This was in the mid-10s. Some weird shit happened in there. First off, I very rarely ever felt alone in there. That sort of intuition that something is staring at you. I would wake up with the closet door open when I 100% had it closed when I fell asleep. There was a handful of times that I could literally feel something sitting at the end of the bed when I was lying in it. Like, the weight of an adult man very clearly depressing the bed near my legs. The worst of it was I was staring at the doorway into the bedroom once with my GF, and we both saw a human apparition float across the room. It was unsettling enough as it was, but to have confirmation that we both just saw it made it extremely real and extremely upsetting. I remember having to sleep in that room that night, and it was brutal. The whole family had stories like this. And everyone seemed weirdly okay with it, as it was understood that it was the brother/uncle still hanging around. I had a few occult/otherworldly type experiences when I was younger. Most of them I've been able to explain since finding out I was experiencing bouts of sleep paralysis. One, however, I've not been able to explain. I was asleep in bed. Suddenly, I found myself awakened by a chattering sound. Oddly, I could only hear the sound in my left ear. I kept my eyes closed but focused on that sound. It moved around my head to my left ear. Like panning from the right speaker to the left speaker. That freaked me out. I finally opened my eyes to see if maybe it was an animal or large bug or spider or something crawling around my head. All I saw when I opened my eyes was a flash of red light. I don't know how, but I only saw the light with my left eye. I jumped up in bed, fully freaked the fuck out. I spent at least 30 minutes trying to calm myself down. When I eventually succeeded, I went to the bathroom to piss before I'd attempt to fall back asleep. While washing my hands post-piss, I glance in the mirror. There, in my left eye, and only my left eye, was a perfect red square. I didn't get back to sleep that night. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. I always had believed in ghosts for years before, but this experience of mine simply cemented my belief. Grandmother died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple of years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I lay awake, reading a magazine. After a while I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open, and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over at the neighbor's house, and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side. The paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. But it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening. The shuffling feet. The fridge door opening. Nobody in the kitchen. Being awakened with a paralyzing fear. The shadow. The heavy breathing. The repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things. But instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." It was 2016, a week after an ex-friend and I got penalized at school for something. I was on my normal commute by rail, but that day, for some reason, when I was looking at the tracks, the stones looked shiny, almost beautiful, when I heard a voice that was light, airy, and thin cajoling me, saying stuff like, "Yes, jump. Go now, it'll be easy, quick, totally painless. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. Just jump." My breaths quickened. The chills I felt were so harrowing as my mind started to feel dazed, a little dizzy, almost as if it wanted to answer or please the voice by going for it. And just as I tiptoed closer to the edge, another voice, this time, mine, albeit a little stronger, slapped me back into consciousness. "Wait. That sounds so odd. It isn't even my voice. What the fuck is happening? I don't understand. Shit, quick, a distraction. I need something now, quick." So I opened my phone, then, fingers scrambling for the first thing I saw, and I opened Pokemon, the thing that saved me. I kept playing it till the train came, and I got in, and I brisk walked to my college counselor about my suicide attempt. He offered to call my parents, and I immediately said no, and that I'll find something, a group project due that day, to help me calm down. Weeks later I told about the encounter to that ex-friend who's got his third eye open, and he confirmed it was a very dark, evil thing that tried to claim me. I was stunned, not because it was indeed a devil's ploy, but because of the way the voice sounded, so high and thin compared to how people usually heard low and deep voices. It's been a long while since then, but once I cut off that friend, who's prone to being vulnerable towards supernatural elements and became a toxic person overall, such encounters no longer found me. I did try to help that person once, but I think it was much better for me not to be around that person anymore. When I was a kid, my sister, 3 years older than me, was convinced she had magical powers. Almost every week she was telling me she had some new power. I have cat powers. I can turn invisible. I have spider powers. When I was 5, my sister and I went to a jungle gym play place. Her power at this time was that she could disappear into thin air. I didn't believe her. I asked her to prove it. She said, "Oh no, you must not watch. When I disappear, I emit a very toxic form of light known as green flash. It will poison you if you see it." I said I didn't believe her still. She said she was going to go round the corner and disappear, and that I had to not watch, but that when she did, I would never be able to find her. And so she went round the corner. But here's the thing. The walls were netting. I could see her perfectly through the netting, which was 99% whole. She thought I couldn't see her, but I could see her perfectly. My eyes were locked onto her, not blinking, as she stood in the corridor round the corner. And then, she fucking vanished. She was there, and then she wasn't. I ran to where she had been and looked high and low around the area for her, and sure enough, she was nowhere to be seen. The corridor was a dead end, so there's nowhere she could have run away to, other than back down the corridor, which I would have seen. There were no other people in that corridor at this time, either. Nobody ran between us. I literally just saw her disappear into thin air. I ran around the jungle gym trying to find her and eventually found her in a completely different part of it. When I asked her how she disappeared, she just said, "See, I told you I have powers." To this day, I have absolutely no fucking clue how this happened. I can't even begin to work out what happened or how she did this. She was totally motionless when she disappeared. She didn't appear to move up, down, left, or right before vanishing. She was there, then she was gone. And I still have no fucking clue how. When I was around 12, my friend and I saw something that I could never explain. If someone told me they saw this, I wouldn't believe them, but I know what I saw. The house I grew up in was on the corner of a city street. The way the house was situated, from my bedroom windows looking out, I had two large ones side by side. You could see the street and the entire side of the house across from us. A guy friend of mine lived on the second floor of that house, and he and his family were gone for the weekend. My friend and I were in my room playing Nintendo, and I was sitting on my bed facing the windows. It was evening, but it must not have been later than 6 or 7 because my friend wouldn't have been over too late. It was her turn playing, and I'm watching the screen, but something catches my eye, and I look out of my window and see something in the friend who is gone for the weekend's home. I kid you not, it looked like what you would describe a Yeti to be. It was white, as tall as the ceiling, and covered in hair. I frantically told my friend to look, and she paused the game and immediately saw the same thing. We got down on the floor and crawled to my window to watch this thing. It was destroying the house. Like breaking chairs, breaking dishes, ripping up the sofa, etc. I remember asking my friend if she was seeing what I was seeing, and she confirmed that she was. We watched this thing for a few minutes and then kind of started diverting our attention to each other in like a "oh my god what the fuck" way, and when we eventually looked back, it was gone. We both kind of seemed to instinctively know that this was something that should stay between us. It wasn't discussed, but the vibe was there. In order to get home, she would have to walk past that house, so she had her dad pick her up. I tried my best to sleep, but I kept waking up and looking out to see if I saw it again, but I didn't. The next day, I was sitting outside my house waiting for the friend who lived in the house to come home. I felt I needed to be there when they eventually came running out of their destroyed home so that I could try to explain what we saw the night before. They pulled up sometime in the afternoon, and I hid behind my door in some kind of fear. Like, I knew this was going to be bad, and I was scared to be a part of it. I watched them go inside, and I wait. And wait. And nothing. Eventually, the friend and his dad come out to get luggage from the car and look as nonchalant as you can be. At this point, I'm confused. The house was destroyed. We saw it happen. I go across the street to my friend, and he greets me. I'm kind of like, what's up? Everything cool? And he starts talking to me about something, and it hits me that the house is fine. Everything was as they left it. At this point I'm so confused because I know what I saw. And I have a witness. Later on, the friend who witnessed this event and I talk, and neither of us can understand what the fuck happened. But life just kind of moves on. It wasn't until I was an adult and I read about so-called glitches in the Matrix that I started to think that might be an explanation for what I saw. Some poor prehistoric creature got whirled into a house, freaked the fuck out, and then glitched back, returning everything to its normal state. I mean, yeah, it sounds fucking crazy, But I racked my brain for decades trying to come up with something more based in reality, and I just can't land on anything. I've only told 2 people what we saw that night, my mom and my husband. Neither outright say I'm lying, because they know me and know I'm not someone who tells stories, but they don't seem to enthusiastically believe me either. I get it. They probably think I saw something that they can logically explain, but I swear, unless you saw it, it's impossible to know how real it was. I live with my grandparents. Sometime around January 2013, I went to sleep, as the next morning I had a test to do, and it would be in a college here in my city. That night I had a dream with my uncle, where I met him at the entrance of that college and talked to him about tattoos and how I wanted to do one. The next morning I woke up around 6:30 a.m., and while I was leaving, the phone rang, but as I was in a rush, I let my grandma answer and went with my grandpa to do the test. Later when I came home, my grandma said that it was my mother on the phone and that my uncle had tried to kill himself that night, probably while I was dreaming with him. My uncle almost died, but he survived and lives well today. Then in October 2013, I had a dream where I was in a pool with a lot of relatives and was talking to my cousin and another uncle. We were playing with a ball and talking. Then I woke up with my phone ringing. I answered, and it was my mom. She told me that my cousin had tried suicide by throwing himself from a bridge. I mean, it was not exactly from the bridge, but the cliff that exists with the bridge. He had no chance to die, but he was pretty messed up and also survived. He has a family today. July 2015. I was studying in another town and was home from vacation. I had lunch with my grandparents and came back to my bedroom. Around 1:30 p.m., my grandma told me that she would go to the hospital with my grandpa because he wasn't feeling okay. Not exactly a hospital. Here in Brazil we have some places called Pronto Socorro, which is a place where people can go to see a doctor, take vaccine shots, and a lot of other things for free. They left, and I slept a bit after lunch while they were away. I slept a bit and dreamed with my grandpa. I had crashed a car, not too badly, and went home to tell him so we could do the things to fix it. When I woke up, my grandma called and said that my grandpa had a heart attack and was sent to a hospital to have a surgery. He also survived, and it's okay now. Okay, context. My tenants and I have been living in this log house for 1 year. We live in rural BC, Canada. My now wife had a girl living with her, let's call her Bree. Bree was shy, quiet, kept to herself, young, and going to school. She rented a room in the basement suite where my wife was renting, and she was her roommate. My wife swears up and down that before I came, she didn't hang out as much, she was in her room, and she would go to work. Well, as soon as I came into the picture, my wife and I started dating in May of last year. She changed. Well, I started talking to her. Innocent, like, how are you, Bree? Or good to see you again, Bree, just trying to make her feel like she wasn't trapped in her room. So she started coming out, asking us questions about boys, relationships, and how to talk. Mind you, her family life was a bit of a mess, so we assumed no one taught her anything, so we openly conversed with her. One day, she left the house, and her friends started getting her into witchcraft, and it wasn't the innocent crystal collecting stuff, like heavy stuff, and her demeanor changed. She was talking to herself, she was accusing others of using her, and she would just get closer and closer with me. Now I just chalked it up to her liking me because she saw a normal, healthy relationship and she wanted some of that, but it was more sinister. Something latched onto her, and it changed her. She would walk into my wife's bedroom, and the mood and the atmosphere would change. One day, when I was staying the night, she came into the bedroom, demanding if we had anything to do with some imaginary situation she had thought had happened. Didn't know what it was, but she just said, "Can I stay here with you guys?" And me and my wife both looked at each other with unease. We said, "You know what, sure, if you need to be around people, you can sleep on the floor," and she literally just plopped right between us. Now, I would never, ever cheat on my wife, but when she sat right between us, a thought that was not my own came into my mind, and it said, I wonder if I could have a threesome right now, and do not get me wrong, Bree was a solid 8.5, but my wife was, still and always will be, in my eyes, a 10. So I immediately said, all right, Bree, can I pray for you, like lay my hands and pray over you, Christian, by the way, and she said okay. We prayed, and immediately, she wanted to leave. So she did. She went to her friend's house down the street. When she left, something stayed. I am talking growling, footsteps, lights being turned on, shadow figures, the works. I offered my wife to stay at my house for the night, and she said no. Fast forward a day later, he pops into my wife's room and sits down, holding a knife. Saying, I'm not going to hurt you, I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. Wife, understandably, calls the ambulance and calls me. I rip over, they put her in the psych ward. A day later, we are cleaning up her room, just heavy. My wife and I fighting until we are done. We then leave the room, and we feel instantly better. Now, this story continues. Even now, we have heard people walking upstairs, the tenants have heard it, they have seen shadows. It's messed. But down in the basement, nothing. When I was a kid, I liked to do mock radio shows and recorded them on cassettes. Mostly, I was just talking crap, or I might put some music in between. On occasion, it was me and my older brother. Sometimes I would just reuse an older tape and record over it, etc. Well, one day, a couple of years since I last made a tape with my brother, I found a tape that I really didn't remember using for radio shows, and when I listened to it, it was really scary. It was heavily distorted, very heavily distorted. It sounded like it was sped up, and I could hear two voices. One was high-pitched, like a child, talking all over the place, as a hyperactive or scared child, and the other was deeper, like an adult, slowly speaking in the background, like a threat. I couldn't understand what they were saying or what language it was. The adult seemed to be saying caralho, which in Portuguese, my native language, is a swear word that is used much the same way as fuck is used in English, but with the speed, distortion, and pitch, I couldn't be sure. Now, the only more or less rational explanation I have is that the origin of this is something that my brother and I recorded. He is 8 years older than me, so those recordings at the time have this combination of an adult voice with a child's one, but how this came to be on that particular tape, which wasn't used for the original recordings, and with the distorted and speed effects, is beyond me. However, I could never be sure, it seemed odd. I didn't remember using that tape, I couldn't recognize the voices or what was being said. It just felt so creepy, like a child asking for help while an abusive adult was threateningly present, so eventually the heebie-jeebies got the best of me, and I threw the tape out. The scariest thing that ever happened to me left me traumatized for years, though no one ever believes me when I tell the story. It happened when I was 12 and visiting my cousin, who had just returned from a trip overseas. While we were playing outside, she asked if I wanted to see a new doll she'd bought on her holiday. It looked like an ordinary doll, except it could speak in 4 different languages. One of its commands was it would use the word mother in its sentences, saying things like, "I'm hungry, mother, feed me," or "I'm sleepy, mother, take me to bed." The doll ran on batteries and eventually, my cousin turned it off and placed it on her bed. Being a typical 12-year-old boy, I picked it up by its hair and yanked on it, just for fun. And then to my horror, the doll suddenly spoke and said, "Help, mother, this mean boy is pulling my hair, and it really hurts." I was so freaked out that I threw the doll across the room and started crying. My cousin was clearly spooked too, but she tried to reassure me by saying the switch probably malfunctioned and the doll had never actually turned off. 3 days later, she told me that she woke up the morning prior, and the doll had just disappeared. She said her older brother had probably thrown it away, but nevertheless, I spent the next 2 years terrified that the doll would come back to hunt me down, Chucky style. I actually got panic attacks every now and then. I even had a plan. Every night, I'd line up all my toys, soldiers, monster trucks, dinosaurs, giant animals, stuffed animals, etc., and tell them that they were responsible for protecting me if the doll ever came for me. Now, 11 years later, my cousin has no memory of that day, but I've never been able to forget it. My friends always laugh at me when I tell this story, but it's something that's stuck with me forever. I have so many unanswered questions, like how did it know I was a boy? How did it know I was pulling its hair? It told its mother that I was pulling its hair, meaning it could differentiate between different humans? How did it speak when it was turned off? And most importantly, how the fuck does a doll disappear overnight? I like to believe the whole event is just a false memory and is just my brain playing tricks on me. When I was a teenager, my family lived out in the Pine Barrens. It's hard to fully describe, but the house had a certain eeriness to it at times. One weekend around noon, my parents were out of the house, and it was just me, alone. Out of the corner of my eye, and as I turned to look, I saw what I thought was the spirit of a woman walking past my door and down the hallway. She had long hair, and everything about her, her hair, her skin tone, her clothing, was sheet white. I was surprised but not scared. I felt a sensation of calmness, that everything was okay, that this was weird but I wasn't in danger. When I told my parents later and described her, both of them shared that they saw her, too, in different places of the house, at different times. Eventually, my dad passed away, I went to another state for college, and my mom reported seeing the white lady on a few occasions and that she felt that she was being looked after and that she was a calming presence. Other times in that house, I was home alone and could swear I heard a door close or a sink run for a few seconds. I've always investigated and never found anything. All of our doors were locked, and there was nowhere for anyone to hide. Years after my dad passed, the strongest scent of cigarettes would waft through the house. He was a chain smoker, but nothing was touched or disturbed that would have caused it, and our neighbors were acres apart from us. We would always say it was his way of saying hello. The last thing I have to say about the house is that my dad used to joke that after he died, he'd come back and scare us by fucking around with things. The night after he passed, I woke up, and the hallway light was on. We always kept it off, but I figured my mom had gotten up to let the dog out and just forgot about it, or, in a worst case scenario, something happened overnight, like a pet getting sick, that required it to be on. So the next morning I asked her about it, and she had nothing to do with it. She thought I left it on. We both figured it was my dad playing one last prank. A couple of years ago I was out walking my dog with some friends of mine. This was in rural Europe at our family's countryside house. We pass a mansion that, at the time, was uninhabited, but rumors in the small village were abound about the mansion being haunted and used for spiritual seances by some. That last fact is true. This was around 1800 hours, and the sun was setting. We are about to pass the mansion, but our attention is caught by a very creepy looking entrance to a cellar that goes underneath a side house belonging to the mansion. I think the term is a wing. It was opened but with a bunch of rusted scrap that partially blocked the entrance into the pitch black space inside. We stand and look for a second as my dog suddenly takes a few careful steps down the stairs to investigate the cellar entrance. Suddenly, my dog just freezes and stares into the dark space of the cellar. For a few seconds we all look at my dog with shock, as he was very jovial just a couple seconds ago. He suddenly dashes up the stairs again to us, somehow manages to crawl and squeeze his way out of his harness. He has never, ever been able to do that before or after, and suddenly bolts in a random direction. We had to chase him for approximately 500 meters before he came to a halt, shaking like a leaf. We decided to head home after that, and I have no idea what he saw in the darkness that made him act so out of character. When I was about 18 to 19, my family and I were living in this big semi-detached house. It had 2 floors, plus a basement and an attic. Pretty big, plenty of bedrooms. For some reason, I would always feel quite uneasy while in the house, like I hated when my family was out somewhere and I was there by myself. Anyways, this one night, it might have been around 1 to 2 a.m., I was half asleep and started hearing someone breathing next to me. My younger brother, about 9 to 10 at the time, would sometimes sleep on the pull-out bed under mine when he had nightmares or just because, so I thought, it's my brother, and went back to sleep. Took me about 30 seconds to realize he wasn't there that night. I freaked the fuck out, turned on the light, and the breathing stopped. I thought maybe I'd been half dreaming or something and had imagined it, so I went back to sleep. But a few seconds later, there it was again. This kept happening throughout the whole night. I would turn on the light, and it would stop. Turn the lights off, there it was again. I could hear it behind my head. It was honestly terrifying. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a single second that night. This kept happening nearly every single night for weeks. I could also hear footsteps around my room and in the attic, above my bedroom, at night. My brother also would say that he could hear someone walking around the house at night. Very fucking creepy. One night, tired of sleeping like shit and being terrified, I politely asked whoever was in my room to please leave my bedroom at night and let me sleep. I asked this super politely and out loud. And laugh at me all you want, but I kid you not, it stopped. I would say this every night before going to sleep, and it never happened again. I still felt uneasy as fuck during the 2 to 3 years we lived there, and I would hear footsteps around the attic at night, but I could sleep again. Really fucking weird experience. It's not scary, per se, but certainly unexplained. My partner and I were in my bedroom just chilling, watching TV, and playing with my cat, the only cat we had. We decided to get up to get something to eat, so I picked up my cat and moved him away from the direction we needed to walk in, setting him back down on the bed. Then I gave him pats on his head. From my bedroom door, you have a straight sight line to the kitchen. As soon as we come out of my room, I see my cat in the kitchen. He reacts to us, realizes he's been caught, and quickly jumps off the counter. We both saw it, and we both heard him land on the floor. It's a distinctive sound. Anyone with pets who can get up onto the counter will understand. There was absolutely no time for that cat to get all the way into the kitchen and onto the counter in the time it took us to take 2 steps out the door and look into the kitchen. Never mind the fact that at no point did he quickly run between our feet, which he would have had to do in order to get out of the room in the first place. I looked back into my bedroom, and my cat was not where I put him. I look back towards the kitchen and see him casually stroll by as if nothing had happened, coming from the direction of the kitchen. I cannot explain it.